He was just the janitor. Until the day he walked into the boardroom wearing a suit that cost more than my car, ready to clean house. The fluorescent lights of the fifth-floor administrative wing always hummed at a frequency that felt specifically designed to induce migraines. It was Tuesday, and the air was thick with that sterile, overly recycled office scent that smelled faintly of old toner and despair. I was pacing my office, executive director of operations, thank you very much, trying to put the finishing touches on the quarterly reports before the big board meeting. My tie felt like a garrote, and my patience, already thin, was about to snap. That's when the shadow fell across my open door. It wasn't a dramatic shadow, just Mr. Henderson, the oldest, quietest man who worked at Sterling and Finch. Henderson had been the janitor here for 30 years. 30 years of silent buffing, emptying trash cans, and generally being invisible. He was in his late 50s, maybe early 60s, with skin the color of rich, dark mahogany, and hands that looked permanently etched with the memory of hard labor. He stood there, clutching a worn industrial mop bucket, looking smaller than usual. "Mr. Davies," he said, his voice raspy, unused. I need to speak with you about the new cleaning schedule." I didn't look up immediately. "Henderson, I'm in the middle of something critical. Can this wait until after lunch? Just follow the updated protocol sheet, please. It's on the bulletin board." "But, sir," he persisted, taking a hesitant step inside, "the new protocol, it cuts my rounds on this floor by half an hour, and I found something in the supply closet that I think you should see." That did it. The critical report suddenly felt less important than this interruption. I slammed my pen down, the noise echoing sharply in the quiet corridor. I finally looked up, giving him the full measure of my annoyance, the kind of icy, dismissive glare that usually made middle managers apologize for breathing too loudly. "Henderson, listen to me very carefully," I said, leaning back in my leather chair, attempting to project calm authority, while feeling none of it. "I appreciate your dedication, truly, but we are restructuring. Efficiency is the key word now. Half an hour is half an hour we save paying overtime. We've brought in a new, automated floor cleaner for the main corridors. You're responsible for the private offices and restrooms now. It's a lateral move. Perfectly clear. Stop looking for problems where there aren't any." He just stood there, his face unreadable, his eyes fixed on a point just above my left shoulder. "Sir, with respect, I've been cleaning this building since before you were hired. I know the wiring, I know the vents, I know where the leaks start. This new schedule means I can't properly attend to the server room floor vents. That carpet absorbs static buildup, Mr. Davies. If we get a major spark—" I laughed. It wasn't a kind laugh. It was the brittle, sharp sound of a man who believed he knew everything about money and nothing about maintenance. "Henderson, stop trying to sound like an engineer. I have the IT report right here. They assured me the static protection is state-of-the-art. You're overthinking this. Frankly, you're demonstrating a resistance to change that is unacceptable in this company culture." He swallowed hard. The silence stretched, filled only by the low, irritating hum of the lights. I realized I was enjoying this a little too much. Henderson had always been a fixture, an easy target for minor slights over the years. The forgotten Christmas bonus, the broken-down cleaning card I'd promised to replace 6 months ago. It was time to clear out the deadwood. "Look, Henderson," I sighed, rubbing my temples. "Let's be honest. You're nearing retirement age. We need someone with more agility, more alignment with our forward-thinking vision. I've been meaning to discuss this with HR. Consider this your final warning about following directives without question. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have actual business to conduct." He didn't move for another second. Then something shifted in his posture. The subservience seemed to drain away, replaced by an almost dangerous stillness. "Very well, Mr. Davies," he said, his voice suddenly low, resonant, and utterly devoid of his usual timidity. "If you feel my service is no longer required, I understand." He set the mop bucket down, not gently, but with a solid, definitive thud that made my coffee mug rattle. He turned, walked out of my office, and closed the door softly behind him. I felt a brief, momentary pang of... what? Guilt? No, satisfaction. One less person to worry about. I picked up my pen, ready to dive back into the Q3 projections, feeling lighter already. 2 days later, the air was electric. Not with static from the server room, but with nervous corporate energy. The board meeting had happened, and it had been a disaster. Not for me, thankfully. The financials were solid, but the rumors flying around were wild. Sterling and Finch was being acquired. A massive, quiet takeover by a competitor we hadn't even known was interested. Phoenix Global Ventures. The CEO, Mr. Sterling himself, called an emergency all-hands meeting for that afternoon. We gathered in the main conference room, usually reserved for shareholder summits. Sterling looked pale and grim. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice shaking slightly. "As of midnight tonight, Sterling and Finch ceases to exist as an independent entity. We have been acquired. The transition team from Phoenix Global will be on site tomorrow morning to begin integration." A wave of murmurs swept the room. My stomach plummeted. Acquisition meant restructuring. Restructuring meant layoffs. My job, the corner office, the expensive title, all suddenly tenuous. Sterling continued. "The terms of the acquisition are unusual. Phoenix Global is streamlining management immediately. They've installed an interim CEO to oversee the integration for the next 6 months. This gentleman is known for his decisive approach and, well, his very specific criteria for who stays and who goes." He paused, took a deep, shuddering breath, and looked toward the door as if expecting someone important. "Please welcome the new interim chief integration officer of Sterling and Finch, Mr. Alexander Vance." The door swung open. The man who walked in was impeccably dressed in a charcoal Italian suit that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. He was tall, powerfully built, radiating an effortless authority that made Sterling look like a frightened schoolboy. His skin was dark, his posture ramrod straight, and his eyes, those eyes, were cold, assessing, and utterly familiar. He looked directly at me, standing frozen near the projector screen, and offered the faintest, cruelest hint of a smile. It was Mr. Henderson, but not the quiet janitor. This man moved with the lethal grace of a predator, and attached to the lapel of that $1,000 suit was a sleek, customized ID badge, A. Vance, CIO. He walked to the head of the table, past Mr. Sterling, and stopped directly in front of me. He leaned in just close enough for me to smell expensive cologne instead of floor wax. "Good morning, Mr. Davies." "Alexander Vance," Henderson said, his voice now polished, commanding, yet carrying that deep, low timbre I'd only heard once before. "It seems we have a few outstanding housekeeping issues to address before we begin day one." The blood drained from my face so fast I thought I might actually pass out right there in front of 30 horrified executives. My mind scrambled, trying to reconcile the man who cleaned my toilet yesterday with the titan who now commanded the room, Alexander Vance. It sounded powerful, utterly unlike Henderson, but the eyes, the cold, dark, unblinking eyes, were the same ones that had looked up at me 2 days ago, full of quiet dignity, before I had summarily dismissed his concerns about static buildup. "Mr. Vance," I managed, my voice cracking embarrassingly high. I instinctively took a step back, bumping into the conference table. I don't understand. Are you affiliated with the acquisition team?" Vance didn't break eye contact. The faint smile remained, not reaching his eyes at all. He turned slightly, addressing the room, but his attention was clearly fixed on me. "I am the integration team, gentlemen and ladies," he announced, his voice cutting through the stunned silence like polished steel. "Phoenix Global Ventures acquired Sterling and Finch because of its potential, yes, but also because of its staggering inefficiencies, its stagnant leadership, and its deplorable internal culture." He let that hang there, heavy and damning. Every person in that room felt the weight of that accusation. I felt it like a physical blow. Mr. Sterling, recovering marginally, stepped forward, looking utterly defeated. "Alexander, we appreciate your swift arrival. Perhaps we could begin with introductions for the rest of the executive team. We have several critical department heads here who need to understand the transition timeline."
Vance waved a dismissive hand, stopping Sterling mid-sentence. "Timelines can wait, Mr. Sterling. We are not here to discuss synergy or Q4 projections today. We are here to discuss accountability." He turned back to me, slowly circling the narrow space between us as if I were a particularly disappointing piece of debris he needed to examine before disposal. "Mr. Davies," he continued, drawing out my name as if tasting something sour. "As Executive Director of Operations, you were, until recently, responsible for the efficient management of this facility and its personnel."
"Yes, that's correct," I stammered, trying to regain a semblance of professional composure. "I oversaw all internal logistics." "Logistics," Vance echoed, nodding slowly. "Indeed. Tell me, Mr. Davies, do you recall a conversation you had with one of your long-term maintenance employees precisely 48 hours ago?" The entire room seemed to lean in. I felt the heat rising in my neck. He was cornering me, publicly, brutally. I speak to staff members constantly, Mr. Vance. I can't recall every conversation." It was a weak lie, and we both knew it. Vance chuckled, a dry, humorless sound that sent shivers down my spine. He reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a slim, silver object. It wasn't a pen. It was a small, high-resolution audio recorder. He pressed play. The room was instantly filled with my own arrogant, clipped voice, layered over the low, familiar sound of a squeaking mop bucket wheel. "Stop looking for problems where there aren't any." My voice echoed, loud and ugly. Then, Henderson's quieter voice. "Sir, with respect, I've been cleaning this building since before you were hired. I know the wiring, I know the vents. That carpet absorbs static buildup, Mr. Davies. If we get a major spark..." And then, my absolute worst moment, delivered with chilling clarity. "Frankly, you're demonstrating a resistance to change that is unacceptable in this company culture. Let's be honest, you're nearing retirement age. We need someone with more agility." The recording ended. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the distant city traffic filtering through the thick window glass. I could feel the judgment radiating from every single person in that room. Executives I had bullied, department heads I had undermined, all now staring at the man who had just been publicly humiliated by the janitor. Vance clicked the recorder off. "Resistance to change, Mr. Davies. A dangerous trait in an employee, but perhaps a necessary trait in a man who understands the true foundation of a building." He stepped back, his posture radiating triumph. "Mr. Sterling," Vance called out, completely ignoring my visible disintegration. "My first official directive as your interim CIO is simple. Begin the immediate termination process for all employees flagged in this preliminary audit for displaying contempt toward essential service staff. Mr. Davies is clearly Exhibit A." Sterling looked ill, but nodded weakly. "Understood, Mr. Vance." I finally found my voice, desperation overriding all remaining dignity. "Wait, Mr. Vance, I demand an explanation. How did you get this position? You were the janitor. I fired you. You can't just walk in here and..." Vance turned fully, his face now completely devoid of any trace of the meek employee I had known. His eyes were hard, burning with years of swallowed pride. "You fired the janitor, Mr. Davies," he corrected me, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper that only I could clearly hear over the rising chatter of the other executives. "You didn't fire the owner of the holding company that held the majority voting stake in Sterling and Finch's primary lender, which effectively gave me veto power over your board decisions the moment the acquisition was finalized." He paused, letting the staggering implications sink in. Phoenix Global Ventures wasn't just an investment firm. It was a shell corporation set up years ago by a consortium of silent partners whose identities were known only to the top echelon. And apparently Alexander Vance was the man at the apex of that pyramid. "You see, Mr. Davies," he concluded, stepping closer until our faces were only inches apart, his presence overwhelming. "When you dismissed my knowledge of the building's infrastructure, you also dismissed my knowledge of corporate law and leveraged buyouts. I didn't just mop your floors. I bought the foundation they stood on." He leaned in one last time, his breath cool against my ear. "And by the way, the static buildup in the server room? It was real. I just needed a legitimate, documented reason to be here when the system inevitably failed. It failed spectacularly last night, by the way. Took out the entire legacy data mainframe. Good thing I'm here to oversee the cleanup. He straightened up, looking down at me as if I were already on the floor awaiting his mop. Now I need you to gather your personal effects, Mr. Davies. Your access badge will deactivate in 5 minutes. I'm eager to see how quickly you can clear your desk before the entire floor has to follow your example. The metallic taste of panic flooded my mouth. He bought the foundation. The phrase echoed in the sudden, terrifying quiet of my mind. For 30 years, Henderson had been invisible, a fixture of the background noise, the gentle thump-thump of the cleaning cart, the scent of industrial cleaner, while all the while he was conducting a parallel, invisible career that culminated in the total annihilation of my professional life. My mind raced, grasping for a lifeline, a defense. This is slander, blackmail. You can't use an anonymous recording against me. And the server failure, that's IT's responsibility, not operations. Vance smiled again, a chilling, controlled expression that didn't reach his eyes. Eyes that now held the cold, calculating depth of a predator assessing its prey. He looked over at Mr. Sterling, who was frantically trying to look busy, adjusting his tie. Mr. Sterling, please ensure Mr. Davies is escorted from the premises once his badge deactivates. And please have security retrieve the keys to the executive parking garage from him personally. I require his spot. The view is excellent. Sterling nodded with frantic eagerness, already moving towards me. Right away, Mr. Vance. Right away. I ignored Sterling's approach and stepped toward Vance again, fueled by a desperate need to understand the sheer scale of my miscalculation. You waited. Why wait 30 years? Why clean toilets if you were this powerful? Why not just leave when you realized the culture was toxic? Vance finally allowed a flicker of something genuine, not warmth but raw, deep-seated resentment, to cross his features. He leaned in again, his voice dropping to that dangerous intimacy. You want to know why I waited, Mr. Davies? I waited because I needed to see precisely how high you would climb. I needed to watch you step on every single person necessary to reach that corner office, the very people, like me, who kept this machine running while you played at being a director. He straightened, gesturing around the room at the terrified executives. You all operate under the arrogant assumption that the people who clean up your messes are inherently lesser, that the value of a person is determined solely by their salary bracket or their tailored suit. I watched you mock my suggestions, ignore my warnings, and deny me basic respect for 3 decades, Davies. I was the one who knew when the pipes froze in the winter of '08 because I was the one down in the sub-basement clearing the ice. I was the one who knew Mrs. Albright in accounting was having chemotherapy because I was the one quietly taking her full trash bin every day, knowing she didn't have the strength to drag it herself. His control was breathtaking. He sounded like a professor delivering a eulogy for my career. I didn't just want my money, Davies. I wanted the perspective shift. And there is no perspective shift greater than watching the man who treated you like dirt realize he's standing in the shadow of the man who now owns the dirt. Sterling reached out a tentative hand toward my elbow. Come on, Brian, let's make this easy. My access badge suddenly emitted a sharp, high-pitched electronic beep. I fumbled for it, staring at the darkened screen. It was dead. The door lock indicator beside my office door across the hall, a door I had walked through every morning for 5 years, flashed red. Locked. 4 minutes, 30 seconds remaining, Vance announced to the room, as if timing a race. Adrenaline spiked, overriding the shock. I couldn't just leave. Not like this. I looked wildly around the opulent conference room, searching for something, anything, that could halt this execution. My eyes landed on the sleek briefcase sitting beside Vance's chair, a high-end, titanium-cased model. It must contain the integration plans, the legal documents, the proof of this elaborate years-long setup. If I could just grab that? You might own the building, Vance, I spat, taking a wild, desperate lunge toward his chair, not thinking about consequences, only about survival and revenge. But you don't own the narrative. I knocked the chair violently sideways, aiming to trip him as I snatched for the briefcase. Vance, despite his tailored suit, moved with shocking speed. He sidestepped the lunge as if I were moving in slow motion. Instead of falling, I stumbled past him, my shoulder colliding hard with the polished mahogany table. But I didn't grab the case. My flailing hand knocked over a crystal carafe of ice water sitting precariously near the edge of the table. It tumbled, hitting the floor with a sharp crack, scattering ice shards and water across the expensive carpet. The very carpet Vance had warned me about. Vance didn't even flinch at the noise. He simply watched the spreading wet patch, his eyes locking onto the resulting damp stain on the carpet, a stain that, under the harsh conference room lights, looked suddenly, ominously, like a slow-spreading dark burn mark. He looked up at me, his face suddenly grim, his composure finally cracking. Not from anger, but from a flash of genuine, unexpected concern that made my own heart leap with a tiny spark of hope. "Davies, you fool," he hissed, his voice losing its polished edge for the first time. He ignored Sterling, who was now shouting for security. Vance crouched down by the spreading water stain, touching the sodden fibers with an almost horrified reverence. "You didn't listen to me about the static," Vance murmured, his gaze fixed on the dark patch. He glanced up at the ceiling panel directly above where the water had pooled, his face paling under the fluorescent lights. That water didn't just hit the carpet. It wicked right down into the access conduit panel hidden behind that loose molding. He stood up abruptly, his composure completely shattered, not by the confrontation, but by the evidence of the structural damage I had just inadvertently caused. "Security!" Vance roared, abandoning all pretense of calm integration. "Forget Davies. Get maintenance up here. Now! That water has hit the primary fiber trunk line. If that shorts out, the entire East Wing grid goes dark. Every financial record, every security archive, gone." The transformation from corporate assassin to panicked building manager happened in the space of a heartbeat. Vance, the formidable Alexander Vance, CIO of Phoenix Global Ventures, was suddenly a man facing a catastrophe he himself had predicted. "Get the emergency foam suppression system online," Vance barked, his voice echoing with the authority of someone who understood immediate crisis far better than boardroom maneuvering. He didn't spare me another glance. My firing had become utterly irrelevant in the face of imminent infrastructural collapse. Mr. Sterling, recovering his own managerial instincts under real threat, was already fumbling for his phone. "Fire suppression. East Wing conduit failure. Everyone evacuate to the auxiliary stairwells immediately." The other executives, who moments before had been positioning themselves to inherit my desk, were now scrambling toward the door, their loyalty to Vance instantly forgotten in the primal rush of self-preservation. The narrative had shifted again. This wasn't about firing the bully, it was about survival. I stood frozen by the wreck of the crystal carafe, my dead access badge feeling like a useless piece of plastic in my hand. The server failure Vance had engineered to cement his authority had just been amplified tenfold by my own stupid, vengeful outburst. The irony was a bitter acid in my throat. I hadn't just lost my job, I had potentially destroyed the data infrastructure of the company that had just been acquired. Vance, however, was moving with terrifying efficiency. He ripped open the flimsy plastic service door leading to the wall panel near the water stain. He pulled out a heavy-duty flashlight from a compartment in his briefcase, the briefcase I had tried to steal, and shone the beam into the cavity. Sparks, faint but undeniable, flickered near the pooling water. "It's already arcing," he muttered, pulling a heavy, fire-resistant blanket from the wall recess, a piece of maintenance equipment I had personally signed off as obsolete 6 months prior. "Sterling, get someone to cut the main power feed to this quadrant. Now!" As Sterling scrambled to obey, Vance looked up, his eyes locking onto mine one last time. There was no triumph, only exhaustion and a strange, grim satisfaction. "Davies," he said, his voice strained over the rising sound of alarms now blaring throughout the building. "You had a choice. You could have listened to the man who knew the infrastructure, the man you dismissed as worthless, and we would both be on the next phase of the integration plan. Instead, you chose pride. He plunged the fire blanket into the conduit space, smothering the faint electrical fire with a violent, practiced motion. The sparking stopped instantly, plunging the small cavity into darkness. You see, Vance continued, his voice suddenly calm again as the main alarm tone began to cycle down into a warning thrum. I spent 30 years learning exactly how this building works, how every weak point is protected, and how every person in power overlooks the details. You spent 30 years learning how to talk about quarterly projections. He stood up, brushing dust from his immaculate suit, the small act conveying volumes about his return to control. He looked at the damp, ruined carpet, then back at me. The data is safe. The damage is cosmetic for now, but your credibility isn't. The security team burst in, led by a visibly shaking head of security, whom I had personally promoted over a more qualified candidate last year. They moved immediately to surround me, expecting orders from Vance. Vance held up a hand, stopping them before they could lay a finger on me. "No need for force," Vance stated, nodding toward my pathetic pile of discarded belongings near the door. "Mr. Davies is already gone. He simply needs to collect his few items and leave the premises immediately. His badge is deactivated." He paused, savoring the finality of the moment. "And as for your employment file, Mr. Davies, now I have ensured that the official reason for your departure reads clearly, terminated for gross negligence resulting in critical system failure and endangering company assets." He didn't wait for my reaction. He turned his back on me entirely, addressing the arriving maintenance crew with sharp, technical instructions about tracing the short and repairing the panel. Questions only a lifelong maintenance professional would know how to ask. As two burly security guards gently but firmly guided me toward the hallway, I looked back one last time at the man who was once Henderson. He was already deep in the technical weeds, his mind already focused on rebuilding the system he had temporarily, and quite dramatically, broken. He hadn't needed to stay and gloat. His victory was structural. He had engineered my downfall not with malice, but with precise measured efficiency, using my own arrogance as the detonator. I stepped out into the silent corridor. The lights in the administrative wing were flickering, unstable, a perfect bleak metaphor for my own career. As I reached the elevator bank, one of the doors hissed open, revealing the empty interior. I stepped inside, pressing the button for the lobby. As the doors slid shut, sealing me in the descent, I saw a final, stark image reflected in the polished brass of the elevator doors. The face of the man who had just fired me, only he wasn't reflected in the elevator. He was standing outside the closing doors on the executive floor, looking down at me, his eyes cold and clear, finally seeing every single part of me, now that I was nothing but residue on the floor he owned. The elevator dropped, carrying me not to freedom, but to the stark, humiliating reality of life outside the walls I had once believed I controlled. And I knew, with crushing certainty, that for the rest of my life, every low-paying dead-end job I ever took, I would be quietly praying that the person emptying my trash was someone I hadn't deeply offended years ago.